Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Wisdom Through Bitcoin podcast. I'm Chris Beauvais, your host. I have with me Peter Ansell here. He's a regular on the Cafe Bitcoin show on the early morning Twitter Spaces. He's been in the Bitcoin community for a little over a year now, kind of considered a new entrant to the space. And I've had a chance to talk with him a little bit, and I think that this is going to be a really good conversation. We'll dive into all sorts of subjects regarding his background, Orange Pill story, and kind of how he thinks about Bitcoin as an asset and how it fits into his investment thesis moving forward. I hope everybody who's listening to this can find some nuggets of information that you can use and relate to in your own strategies and understanding of Bitcoin. And with that, I will hand it off to Peter here. Hey, Peter, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining the show. I want to start it out with kind of a big swinging question here that most people are always interested in when getting into the Bitcoin space is what was your Orange Pill story and why is Bitcoin an asset to you?
You're right. That is a big, broad question. I guess, so I came into Bitcoin in February of 2021. And I guess the short answer to that is it was number go up. I saw that happening. I thought it was a secular wave. I didn't know what it was, but I know that in my lifetime of investing, that if you can get yourself in front of a secular wave and ride that to the top, that's generally an easy way to be financially successful. And so I started looking at it, and I started treating it as an investment, as a part of my portfolio. And unfortunately, along with that came some shit coins that I also invested in. I came from the school of you need to have a diversified portfolio, and I thought, well, I should have a diversified portfolio within this particular sector that I was looking at. And I didn't really have any kind of understanding of what it was I was getting into. And so I started DCAing. I think my first purchase was in the low 40,000s or high 30,000s. And I just continued to DCA into it all the way up to 64,000 and then all the way back down. And somewhere along the way, I think was May of 2021, I'd never been on Twitter before, and I thought, well, I'll try this Twitter thing. And I'm an older guy. I'm 58. I'm retired, and I do have some interest in technology. I'm not Forrest Gump, but I'm also not the smartest guy. So I thought I'd give it a try, and very luckily, I happened to immediately land in some Bitcoin maxi spaces, and I very quickly understood that Bitcoin was something different. And the reason I understood that was because I was attracted to these maxi spaces because they tend to follow the Socratic method. And as I grew up as a child, the Socratic method was always encouraged in my household. That was a value that we held. Education and critical thinking were things that were very highly valued in my family. And so coming into a Bitcoin Twitter space with a bunch of people yelling at each other, or apparently yelling at each other, and discussing, very hard topics and trying to go at things from a 10th man perspective, i.e. what is the worst case scenario, and somebody take that and everybody else talk about why it couldn't happen, was very familiar to me, and I enjoyed it very much.
Great. Who introduced you to Bitcoin? Or how did you get introduced to Bitcoin?
I'm a serial CNBC watcher.
Okay.
And I would see, I saw them talking about it. I mean, I remember in 2000 and I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 13, I heard about it. There was the people driving around, in the Lamborghinis. There was the memes about Lamborghinis and all this stuff. I didn't really get it then. I wasn't close enough to it. And for me at that point, it was internet magic money. I probably associated it with video games. And, the last time I played a video game was in 1995, and I think it was Doom. So
Nice.
I haven't really done that kind of thing much. And so it was something that people were using. I knew people were using it for gambling, because gambling had gone offshore at that point. It wasn't legal in the United States to do online gambling. But I think in 2020, we started to see it kind of mainstream on CNBC, and there was people that I respected who were talking about it. The Nigerian brothers, who else? Jim Cramer. Quite a few of the people of the characters on Mark Yusko. These were people who were talking about it when it was around $5,000, $10,000, and they kept talking about it going up, up, up. And eventually, around $18,000, I was looking at it, and I kept saying to myself, "Okay, when it gets back down to 18, I'm going to get in." And of course, that was when it went from 18 to 40 over the next, 3-4 months, 5 months, whatever it was. It never came back down to the level at which I was going to get back into it. And eventually, I decided I needed to get into this thing, and it was probably because it number go up.
Gotcha. So if you got into it around the 30s and 40s range, and then you watched it climb up to 69,000, and then slowly started over the last year, just tick away at lower lows and lower highs, all the way down to our present level, about 17,000. How did you keep your mindset of this asset still meets my criteria, and I'm going to stay in the asset and keep allocating to it?
I think at first, I went by the adage, if I liked it at 64, I better really like it at 44. And if I liked it at 44 and at 64, well, then at 34, I better back up the truck. But I was also listening to people who are much smarter than me, who have a much broader understanding of macroeconomics, of monetary policy, of finances, history, philosophy, all these things that kind of intersect with Bitcoin. And I began to understand that I really didn't know what money was. I had been infected by this is in retrospect now, but I had been infected by the fiat virus, and I was just blindly taking whatever the government and individuals in the financial sector were telling me, because throughout my entire lifetime, I basically saw higher highs through when you start investing in 1987, basically, through 2022. We have seen nothing but a bull market. We have seen nothing but a manipulated, except for a couple of crashes, the Great Financial Crisis, the dot bomb in the early 90s, the Japanese real estate bubble. Except for a few of these bubbles along the way, we had seen nothing but higher highs. And that was, it turns out, unbeknownst to me, was because of fiat manipulation, central bank manipulation, governments coming in and acting as a backstop for the financial institutions that could do this kind of thing. So it was, I think it was this awakening in me when I started listening to Bitcoin maxis, and they started really helping me to understand that this Bitcoin was more than just an asset. It was a technology. It was a technology that can be built upon. It was something that nobody has control of. It's something that is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And I began to realize that this was something much bigger than I had originally thought. It wasn't just an asset. It wasn't just a part of my portfolio. This was something that was going to turn into base layer money that everybody in the world was going to be able to equally participate in. And one of the things that was really hard for me was I had to step back and realize that my privilege as a white American male in a boomer, a young boomer, but a boomer, I had all of this privilege that was given to me because of my proximity to the US dollar money printer. And now, granted, I'm not Larry Fink. I'm not Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett or any of these other guys, Ray Dalio, that have huge amounts of assets and profit even more because they're even closer to the money printer. But I am closer than 90% of the world to this fiat hegemony that taxes the entire world for the benefit of very few. I just happen to be one of those few that was benefiting. And when you get to the point where you realize that you are one of the privileged that has been able to benefit from this really unfair system, that's a hard pill to swallow. And that was when I really started to understand that Bitcoin was much more than just an asset. It was a base layer money that everybody was going to be able to utilize, that anybody could get into. The playing field was the same for everybody, and the rules were the same for everybody. And it was unlike anything I had ever seen or understood before.
Great. That's a mouthful of what you just said there. There's so many people I've talked to who have similar understandings and came to Bitcoin in a similar fashion. When you're talking about the idea of American privilege and, the world reserve currency is the US dollar, so we don't experience inflation and the stresses and strains on economies the same way other nations do. For you, was there a particular epiphany or a moment in time where you were just realized, oh my God, Bitcoin is going to be huge? And was it something that you thought about for yourself, or was it kind of what you were saying, that you realized that Bitcoin is much bigger than the US centric point of view, and it was more of a global asset class that could bring everybody up?
I think, once again, that's a really tough question. I have to think about it for a second, because part of it was that I lived through the dawn of the internet. I was there when cell phones first came around. I mean, I remember the brick phones. I remember the phone that you carried around in basically a
briefcase.
purse.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
dad had
I
one of
remember
those.
all of that stuff. And then I also remember that I didn't really understand what was going on with the internet. I remember Netscape and Windows Explorer and that whole thing. And I didn't really get it. I didn't have the foresight. And I said to myself, and I was very, very fortunate. In 1998, a friend of mine told me to invest in Apple, and I did. And that one investment basically created, I want to say, 80% of my generational wealth. And because I never sold it, I didn't sell it until February of 2020. I just held on to it, and it continued to do its thing. But I said to myself, this is the internet for finances. Bitcoin is going to be to the financial world, financial technology, what TCP/IP was to the internet. It is a base layer protocol that is just amazingly good at what it does. And I began to understand that coupled with Twitter and hearing the stories, talking to people from other countries, from people in particular from Central and South America, who are incredibly impacted by U.S. policy. And in particular, I began to understand that the stimulus checks that all Americans received in post-COVID, what was it? It was like $1,800 or something like that per American, or maybe a little more, might have been $2,400, whatever it was. I began to understand that everybody in the world who needed dollars to purchase energy, to purchase commodities, to do whatever they were doing with world trade was paying a tax so that I could get that stimulus check, so that every American could get that stimulus check. And I said to myself, wow, this is so unfair. They have to pay for the inflation that this creates, but they don't get any of the benefit for anything. And then I began to realize that the U.S. Dollar and the U.S. World Reserve currency being the dollar means that we being the United States, are basically mining the resources of the world and giving them effectively worthless pieces of paper for it. And I thought that was really unfair. And I think that was the moment that I really realized that, yes, this is something that this is going to be the single greatest transfer of wealth the world has, that humanity has ever seen. And it's going to happen like that because typically people like me, and I'm assuming like yourself, are individuals who are going to come to Bitcoin last, because we don't have a need or necessity for one or many of the properties of Bitcoin. Whereas people in the developing world, the unbanked, people who don't have a place to store their value or to transact like we do, they need this protocol. They need the ability to access this technology that allows them to, in an unconfiscatable way, to be able to store their value and to be able to transact among their peers.
Yeah, there's a story that my wife likes to tell when she's talking to her girlfriends when she's trying to orange pill them. And it's about a lady from Afghanistan. And I think she was at the Bitcoin 2021 conference in Florida, talking about her story. But she was in a really bad marriage, in an abusive situation in Afghanistan. And she had access to the internet. So she was able to procure work from around the world, whether it was writing articles or proofreading or just doing little odds and ends things. And she was able to get payment in Bitcoin, which was really rare, but because she had access to the internet and that she had heard of this technology, she figured out how to create a wallet and get paid in this. And over time, she was able to accumulate enough money to be able to break away from her relationship and flee the country to the Western world and live a much more prosperous life, which I always found a very, it's a beautiful story. It could easily be made into a movie. It's kind of what we think about when we think about kind of the American dream and how one would accomplish that, moving from an impoverished country, then immigrating to a Western world country and having more opportunity because of the freedoms that come along with a lot that happens in the Western world, government and politics and countries and whatnot. And so that was kind of a starting point for us. But when you're talking to, now I assume a lot of the people that you talk to outside of Bitcoin Twitter and the small circle of Bitcoin maxis on the internet that we've all become friends with, how do the people in your family and in your immediate circle of influence, your friends, talk to you about Bitcoin? Do they tease you about it? Are they inquisitive? What are their thoughts on the asset? And how do you navigate those conversations?
That particular aspect of my relationship with my family and friends has changed over time. At first, I was talk about Bitcoin at any chance I could. Anytime we were talking about something and something came up that had to do with inflation or economics, or I would always be like, hey, there's Bitcoin. And eventually I started to realize that they just didn't want to hear it. They weren't interested. I had some conversations with my family, and I remember one of my sisters once, I even offered to give my family each one of my family members a substantial amount of Bitcoin. If they would value in denominated in USD, if they would simply put it into cold storage, they would simply get a cold storage device, and not one of them did it. And I was talking to my sister about it, and she said, "Well, you got to have an interest in it. If I don't have an interest in it, I'm going to be doing something else." And it blows my mind. I can't imagine how you could not have an interest in this. And then that was when I realized that if you don't have a need or necessity for one or many of the properties of Bitcoin, you're just not going to have any interest in it. There's no need for you to do it. For me, the interest was the unconfiscatability of Bitcoin and the transportability of it. For me, was really, really interesting. I've always been the kind of person that's, I want to be able to get up and leave as quickly as I need to and just go. And that's always been a go bag with, X amount of cash and, a little bit of precious metals and maybe some jewelry or, a passport and that kind of stuff. It's always been available just in case something happens. And now I can take a significant amount of my wealth, 40% to be exact. That's how much Bitcoin I have, and it denominated in percentage of my wealth. I can take 40% of my wealth with me without blinking an eye. It's there. All I need is the seed phrases that I have, and I can go anywhere in the world and I can access that wealth. And I can also now, because I understand how the system works and how Bitcoin works, I can also now very quickly transfer the rest of my wealth, which is mostly in cash and equities. So it's very liquid. I can also transfer that and turn it into Bitcoin very quickly, if that is necessary. Or if I find that to be necessary. But my friends, there's a few of them who have shown some interest. I purchased a significant amount of Bitcoin for a friend of mine who I've known since I was 13 years old. And I just had lunch with him today, as a matter of fact. We still have lunch together on a weekly or bi-monthly time frame. Almost all the time. We talk on the phone quite a bit. And he's gotten a node. He's gotten a Raspberry Pi. He's looked into it, but he has yet to. He actually also got a hardware device, but he just hasn't taken that step to actually take the Bitcoin that I had offered him. And the deal is that I bought it at a certain U.S. denominated price point, and I said, when that doubles, you got to give me half of that back. And he just hasn't done that. So. And that's okay. I'm not going to pressure him. And that's what I have found, is that the stage that I'm at now is I don't bring it up. I never say anything about it. If somebody else wants to bring it up, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But I think it's more off-putting, in spite of the fact that I'm just under the surface. I just want to scream Bitcoin at the top of my lungs whenever I have the opportunity. I don't now. And I think it's much better that way. And when people are ready to, I'll be the Uncle Jim. When people are ready to learn something about Bitcoin, when they decide they have a need or necessity, hopefully I'll be there to be able to point them in the right direction, so they don't make some of the mistakes that I've made and some of the mistakes that people that I know have made.
So your friend, he has the Bitcoin, and I'm assuming he just leaves it on an exchange, or he doesn't have the Bitcoin.
No, he's never. All I asked him to do was to get a hard drive, a signature device, create a seed phrase, and I would transfer the Bitcoin to him, and he still hasn't done it yet. He's gotten the signing device. He's got a cold storage device, but he just hasn't spun it up.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I have two hardware wallets, and I've set up one, and that's all good. And I had my second one right here, but I have a second one that's been sitting on my desk for about 2 months now, and I keep meaning to spin it up and start putting some Bitcoin on it, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Chris, let me guess. Your first one is most likely a ledger, but quite possibly a Trezor.
It's one of those two. Yeah.
Okay. It's
And
very interesting because that is the normal iterative, and the one I'm guessing the one that's sitting there that you haven't dealt with yet is probably a cold card. But
you
you
got
don't
it.
have.
That's the one.
So this is a normal progression for people in Bitcoin. It's leave it on the exchange. Okay, I got to get it off the exchange. A hot wallet seems like something that's easy and familiar and safe. So I can move a little bit to the hot. Oh, okay, that was pretty easy to do. I'm going to go get the Trezor because that's or the ledger. I had a ledger personally. Matter of fact, I still have two of them, but I don't use them anymore. I'm going to go to the ledger because the ledger has a user friendly interface, and a guy like me should be able to do it. Did it the ledger. Turns out that the cold card is the easiest thing to do. It's
Yeah.
quite funny. If you couple, I coupled cold card with Sparrow, and the documents in Sparrow for spinning up a cold card make it so incredibly easy.
Okay.
I mean,
No,
it's
that's
easy to
good to
read
hear.
through. Yeah.
That's great to hear because I have the video on YouTube with BTC Sessions, and he walks you through the whole setup process with the Sparrow wallet and your cold card, but it's like 2 hours long, and so I just have to sit down and do it.
If you do the if you do the Sparrow documentation, you'll have the cold card spun up in a matter of 15 minutes, depending upon how quickly you can get the 24 words, which is pretty easy. If you want to do the passphrase, you can do that too. It's not scary at all. It's easy. And then the beauty of it is there's only two parts that are somewhat sticky with this documentation, I would say. One is at the beginning of the documentation, it says, hey, if you want to look further into the security of this thing, the cold card, you can go to CoinKite's site. And, there's a whole bunch of documentation there. Don't do it. Because it's,
Okay.
once you get to CoinKite, it's just incredibly dense material. It's not necessary. Or at least wasn't necessary for me, I should say. And then the only other sticky part is when you actually point your Sparrow software to a public node, because unless you have your own node, you got to point it to a public node, and they give you a choice. And like Electrum, for instance, you just want to make sure that the node that you choose to point it to is an open source node that has already been vetted by the Bitcoin community, and there's several of those.
Yeah,
But those
I
are the
do
only.
run my own node, which
So
is nice. I
super
actually have a
easy.
funny story about that. When I got my Raspberry Pi 4, and it came with a whole kit, basically. So all I had to do was put it together, which I thought would be easy. But when everything came in the mail, it's like, you have to be almost like a hardware engineer at first glance to figure out how to put this thing together. So I figured to myself, and a story I tell everybody is, hey, man, you can learn anything on YouTube these days. Just type it in, and I guarantee there's going to be a video for it. So in the casing for my Raspberry Pi, there was a little fan, and it had a little plug extension, and I couldn't figure out where to plug it in. I knew it had to be some of the prongs that were sticking up on the circuit board, but I didn't know which one it was. So I type it into YouTube, and sure enough, there's a video for it. And I click on the video, and it's this 10-year-old kid who walks me through the process of how to finalize putting together my node. And then I turned it on and plugged it in and spun it up. And, it took about 6 days for the entire blockchain to download onto it. And, at that point, everything was golden. And what I love about it is I use the Umbrel node software, and I like that I can just dial right into it from any computer in my house that's on my network or my cell phone, very simply. And I can take a look at the blockchain, and I can take a look at transactions, and I can see how quickly blocks are being produced, which is one of the great things about running a node, because it's kind of like your accounting software, right? Like if you go to the bank and you say, how much money do I have in my account? They'll give you a number, but that money's not really there. It's just kind of a number on a screen. And with Bitcoin, it's different. When you run the analytics and you look at your wallet, it'll actually tell you exactly how much is there, and you can pull it out, and you don't have to ask anybody for permission, and you can do whatever you want with it. But about 6 months after I spun up my node, my hard drive crashed on me. And I was like, okay, well, maybe there's a setting or something like that. So I went back to YouTube and I tried a whole bunch of different things that they said. And I went on Twitter Spaces and I talked to some people who are a little bit more technical than me, and they gave me some options and nothing seemed to work. So I was like, okay, great. I guess I have to get a new hard drive for this thing. So I went and I got another hard drive and I plugged it in, and then I spun it back up again, and my Bitcoin was gone. And luckily at that point, I only had like $100 of Bitcoin on it. But still, I was like, hey, if Bitcoin is going to work, I got to get my Bitcoin back. Like, it can't just be gone. But because I still have all my seed phrases and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately, I ended up doing a little bit more research and then connecting the Blue Wallet over to my Umbrel node. And then in Blue Wallet, you can put in all your seed phrases. And I put in my 24 seed phrases, and bam, all my Bitcoin was back. It was incredible. It was like I went from the highs of having everything that I needed running. I had my cold storage wallet, I had my node running, I had my hot wallet, I had my exchange stuff. Everything was all set up to, oh no, I've lost it. What happened? I don't want to be another one of those dooms. I don't want to be another one of those stories of somebody whose hard drive crashed and they lost all their Bitcoin, or they threw their computer away and now they're spending, millions of dollars searching through dumps trying to find their hard drive. And when it came back and I saw it there, I was like, oh my God, I was sold on Bitcoin before, but when I had lost it and then was able to recover it using my seed phrases, and I didn't need anybody's help to do it, I was over the moon. This is the thing. This is how people need to secure their wealth.
So two things from that story that you just said. First, one thing that every boomer is going to associate with the 10-year-old that showed you how to set up the node. When I was in my 20s, I wanted a 12-year-old to come with the VCR because they were so incredibly hard to program and set up. But a 12-year-old could do it immediately. So that was the joke amongst my friends and I, was whenever we got a new piece of stereo equipment or television equipment, we needed a 12-year-old to come with it. So it's very funny that you say that you had the 10-year-old to help you with the node, because that's the node is obviously the new VCR. And the other thing is that, isn't it just wonderful that Bitcoin was never lost? It never left the Bitcoin protocol. It never left on chain.
Yeah.
And it was just a matter of you being able to access it with your private key, which is your seed, as you know, which is your seed phrase. And you're right, it is an incredibly powerful thing. I like to say, and I've said it often before, Bitcoin is the first time in my entire life when I have actually owned something, not virtually owned something, but I've actually owned something that nobody can take away.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you say there, because early in the conversation you had mentioned, Bitcoin is kind of something that's there but isn't really there.
It's everywhere but nowhere at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere because you can access it no matter where you are in the world. You can access it as long as you have an internet connection. And it's nowhere because it's literally not physical.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I like to start orange pilling stories with, or conversations with people now, is immediately starting with the fact that the US dollar, or most currencies around the world, are already digital. And if you can't get the person you're talking to understand that 99% of the money out there is already digital, then it's going to be a very hard conversation to even bring up Bitcoin, because it's 100% digital. There's been companies that have tried to create physical representations of Bitcoin, and you can get these like plastic dollar bill kind of things that have codes on them that are reflecting in that value of Bitcoin. So people can carry it around in their wallet or whatnot. But I don't really think that those types of products are really going to be mainstream, because people want simplicity in their life. They don't want things to be more complicated. And one of the things I've noticed about helping people get started in Bitcoin is there's a lot of different exchanges you can use out there. There's a lot of different companies out there. How did you determine what was the right exchange for you? And did you try several of them before you settled on the one that you use now? And how did that process go for you?
Well, I think I did what 99% of all Americans do when they want to buy some cryptocurrency. They go to Coinbase because that is the largest and easiest to access of the exchanges. So that's what I did. I went to Coinbase and I purchased most of my first 6 or 8 months worth of Bitcoin on Coinbase, along with the shit coins. And then once I got into the the Bitcoin Maxi space, I started hearing about this company called Swan. I'm not paid for Swan. Swan does, they promote Bitcoin Cafe. They're a Bitcoin only company. And I realized that these were people who are in business and they make money, but they have the same values and mindset that I do. They want Bitcoin to be a success for everybody, and they really believe in the Bitcoin story, the Bitcoin ethos, and the value of Bitcoin and what it's going to do for the world. And I decided that I was going to utilize Swan for the majority of my Bitcoin purchases. And the other thing is that, once again, as a boomer, I have yet to deal with any company besides maybe Apple and Amazon that has as good a customer service as Swan. They're patient. They'll answer your questions. They'll walk you through the process. They don't try to upsell you on anything. They just want to help you understand what it is you're trying to do at that moment, and make you feel safe and secure about whatever it is that you're doing at whatever speed you want to do it. And I value that. I value that personal relationship that I've built with my account representative, and the customer service representatives at that company. And I think that from what the era that I come from, you patronize companies that have done you right and are on the up and up. And so that's what I do. I have since also used Cash App and Strike. I do quite a bit of small purchases on Strike, mainly because Strike is a Lightning-centric kind of protocol, or excuse me, Lightning-centric kind of technology. And so it's very easy for me to purchase things and move value around peer-to-peer via Strike. And I learned about Strike once again through Twitter, because when Twitter first started its tipping, it was connected to Strike. Strike was the technology they were, the Lightning technology they were using. Well, I don't know if it was Lightning technology. I'm probably misspeaking, but
it was. I believe it was. Yeah.
So, but they were the company that they first used to be able to do that, and it was just such a cool thing to be able to take my U.S. dollar balance, pay somebody across the world in Japan, tip somebody across the world in Japan or Afghanistan or Brazil a small tip for what they were doing, and they received it in either Bitcoin or their own local currency, whatever they wanted. And I didn't need to know how it did it. I do now. I didn't need to know how it did it, but I know it did it on the rails of Bitcoin, and it was just an amazing thing. And so those are the two exchanges that I use now are Swan and Strike. And then I immediately, or as quickly as I can, I get my Bitcoin that I purchase off the exchange and into cold storage.
Yeah, great. I just had a question on there, and I'm drawing a blank on it now. But let's kind of change gears a little bit here. So I imagine that, so if you're 58 and retired, you're probably working with a financial advisor in some capacity. When you were looking at moving what has become a substantial amount of your assets into Bitcoin, did you have any conversations with him or her? What were some of the dialogue that took place there from the financial institutions that you were looking to cash out from and move into Bitcoin?
So I currently do not have a financial advisor. I did have a financial advisor. The financial advisor did not want to do what I wanted to do, and not in regards to Bitcoin, but just in regards to my macro kind of viewpoint of what was going on in the world. And I'll just touch on that really quickly. In January, starting in January last year, I was very concerned with where the economy was going. I had a typical portfolio. At that point, I think I was about 10% in Bitcoin, which my financial advisor was fine with because I had framed it as starting this out as a 5% position in cryptocurrencies. And they were like, yeah, that's okay. You can gamble, go ahead. It's just a small percentage of your portfolio. And I think they saw a number go up, but they didn't want it to be any major part of my portfolio, but they weren't concerned with a small percentage of my portfolio being in a what they consider to be a high risk asset. And then starting in January of 2022, I began to really believe that this outlook of things were not going to be good. Things were going to get bad. This money printing was going to cause a crash. There was going to be some kind of event that was going to create some really bad financial times for the majority of people who were invested in the stock market. The value of the dollar, you can't print $10 trillion worldwide and think that it's not going to lessen the purchasing power of the dollar. So long story short, I kept telling my financial advisor, every time there's a bounce in the market, I want to start building a cash position. I want to start, and he just didn't do it. So come June of 2022, I fired him, took over my accounts, and from June until August, I basically built a 100% cash position. And then I started working with an individual who had the same outlook as I did, who was shorting the market. And I started working with him and then continue to work with him in my fiat part of my portfolio. And I am using the derivatives markets, which is incredibly risky. I mean, you can lose money. It's amazing. It's amazing how much money can be created in a short time, and how much money you can lose in a short time. But I've been very lucky. I'm working with a guy who has a very good risk mitigation system, and so far it's been very profitable for me. But in the meantime, I had continued to increase the size of my Bitcoin allocation. So as I was building a cash position, I was also building my Bitcoin position, and it has gone from about a 5% allocation at the beginning of January of 2022 to now a 40% allocation of and that 40% allocation is in spite of the fact that the price has continued to diminish over time. I have bought a significant amount of Bitcoin between September of 2022 and the current date. And that is mainly because the profits that I am making in the derivatives market is going directly into Bitcoin.
Was gold or silver ever a thought as an allocation during this time?
Yes, I do have some silver. I don't regret buying the silver, but you know, silver's really heavy, and until you actually have 20 or 40 pounds of silver in your hands, it's really hard to imagine how cumbersome it is to move around. It's very dense material. I mean, think about picking up a piece of steel that is, the size of a shoebox, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's a heavy thing. It's not easy to move around. It's not easy. It's like, what do you do with this stuff? So I do have some silver. I had contemplating buying some gold, and I didn't. Now I'm contemplating selling the silver and potentially at a loss, though not a significant loss, and then buying some gold instead, just to, once again, because this is my fiat mentality. I think that ultimately gold is going to be a worthless, not worthless, but a commodity that is worth far less than it is today. But I think we are in an era, a transitionary era between fiat and a digital currency, that being Bitcoin. And I think during that transition, it would behoove me to have a small allocation into a precious metal like gold, because other people are going to value that. And those people that value gold are probably not going to value Bitcoin as much, at least during this transition period. And so, even though ultimately it may turn out to be something that is not worth a lot or worth anything compared to what I purchased it for, along the way, it might be valuable for me as something to be able to utilize in trade with somebody who does value it.
One of the interesting things that I found about being in this space since 2017 is, like you're talking about, the wealth of knowledge that's pouring into this space from people who are much smarter than either one of us and many of the people in this space. When I first got involved in it, there was a guy by the name of Trace Mayer, and one of his the Mayer multiple is used very commonly as the 200-day moving average of Bitcoin, as what the market price of Bitcoin is when you eliminate all of the volatility of the day-to-day price swings in it. And you can just Google Trace Mayer and Mayer multiple, and you'll find the Twitter page. There's an AI page that's set up that Preston Pish actually set up a few years back.
I believe it's around 0.7 right now.
Is that what it's at? I haven't looked at it in a while.
Yeah.
I always just have the chart up on my computer screen. I just click back and forth through, and I have the 50-day, the 100-day, and the 200-day
I think
on
the
there. I'm not a
200
day
day is
trader or
around
anything like
0.7.
that. I just buy and hodl, as they say. But I've always kept an eye on it. And he was a big gold bug until he discovered Bitcoin. And then a few years ago, he went a different route and kind of disappeared from the Bitcoin community. And then Max Kaiser was coming up in the space at the time, and he was a big gold and silver bug. And now he's not in gold or silver anymore as of this year. And then when I was starting to realize that there was a lot of challenges on the horizon back in 2015, I started listening more to Peter Schiff and some of those other gold guys, Harry Dent. And after about 2 years of listening to them, I realized that none of their predictions were coming true, because a lot of the things that they were basing their theses on weren't happening in reality, because the government was manipulating the money so much. And that started putting me more and more down this monetary rabbit hole. And then after Max Kaiser, then we move forward to today, and we have Greg Foss, and we have Luke Roman, and we have Jeff Booth, and Lynn Alden, and Preston Pish. And every year there just seems to be 2 or 3 more of these incredibly successful, incredibly smart people who can articulate what's happening, what we're experiencing happening, but we can't explain why it's happening. These people come into our space and they give us more of the flavor and the color and the understanding, and help us put together the pieces of what's going on. So even if you don't own any Bitcoin, being in the Bitcoin space is just such a such a wealth of knowledge on what's happening out there, and seeing, how the central banks have increased these interest rates. You were talking about how when you first got into the market in 1987, at first my mind would have been like, okay, I'm 42, so I was 7 years old at the time. I was like, that's really no here nor there for me. I don't really have any understanding of that. But what I do know now is interest rates were much higher then than they are now. And so when you start putting together the pieces of how the lowering of interest rates year over year, and as you're talking about these bust cycles in 98 with the stock market, and then in 2001 with the NASDAQ, and then in September 2001 with the NASDAQ and the trade towers, and 2008 with the real estate and the Japanese real estate market. What you begin to see is at each one of those moments, interest rates dropped significantly, which increased people's purchasing power or ability to finance more for less. And, now we're on the other side of that Rubicon, where in the last 12 months, interest rates have gone from effectively zero up to about.
Chris, you got to remember too that it's really a very, very small percentage of people that have access to that liquid capital. Most people in the world don't, but everybody pays the price for that. The entire world pays for it. Only a few of us get the privilege of being able to access it.
Yeah, because we live in America here in this US dollar denominated world. We experience inflation, but not in the same way that much of the rest of the world is experiencing inflation. And if I have to be honest, I have to kind of think it's kind of what plays into how a lot of the American industrial manufacturing got offshored to Mexico and China and other places, because it's just too expensive to make it here because Americans want too much money for it. But when we're giving US dollars to countries that have already inflated their money so much, the consistency of the purchasing power of the dollar becomes more attractive to them, even at a much lower price, which is similar to, I guess you could say, Bitcoin now, where even though it's volatile, to have something that you can have self-custody of and spend the way you need to. And although, if you're in Argentina, inflation is going up, 20% per year. So if Bitcoin isn't moving in any direction at least 20%, you're getting ahead of the game. And I've heard numerous stories of people there that have Bitcoin and have been able to avoid much of the inflationary challenges that, say, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, Turkey, Hungary, Lebanon, these countries are experiencing.
Lynn Alden just came out yesterday and on Twitter and said that Egypt is 18.3%.
Yeah,
inflation.
Isn't that amazing?
That's 300 million people. It's a lot of people in Egypt that are experiencing. Yeah, it is truly amazing. It really is. And part of the sinister aspect of the US dollar hegemony is that countries, since they're forced to acquire US dollars to purchase energy, that means that they need to produce commodities that they can sell for US dollars into the US market. And so what happens is these countries create industries to mine or access these commodities that they don't need themselves, that the United States wants or the Western world wants, to get the US dollars. And what happens is they are no longer able to create or produce the commodities or products that they need within their country. And so then they're forced to go out onto the open market and purchase those instead of being able to produce them themselves. So it's this vicious cycle that they get caught in, all because of the need for US dollars to buy energy on the world markets. And it's a horrendous a horrendously sinister way for the United States and the Western world to resource mine the rest of the world, and it's horrible. It's like what I've just begun to understand about what France does. France holds the gold reserves for 10 or 15 African nations, charges them interest for them to borrow against their own gold reserves, prints their fiat money, and then demands resources from those countries to go to. It's the most sinister thing I think I've ever seen, and it happens at an incredibly high level. And the people that have instituted this know exactly what they're doing, and it is really a horrible thing.
Colonialism 101.
Yep. Only colonialism 101. Only I'm not actually there doing it. And this is the funny thing about what you were talking about earlier about one of the first things that you do when you orange pill people is you say, 99% of your money is already digitized. And the reality is that not only is 99% of their money already digitized, but colonialism has become digitized. The warfare is becoming digitized. I mean, all these things are becoming digitized. It's this slow progression towards digitization. And for someone to think that they can avoid that, it's like saying in 1990, it's like saying I don't need the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, think about living without the internet. You can do it. I mean, Ted Kaczynski did it. I don't know what kind of life that is, but or maybe it's a better life. I don't know. But I mean, currently it's a wonderful thing to have. When I grew up, it was Star Trek, and Gene Roddenberry and the producers of Star Trek, they got a lot of things right. They didn't get the time frame right, but they got a lot of things right. And that was who would have thought in 1960 that you would have a computer in your hand that you could magically talk into and a car would come and pick you up.
Right.
I mean, if I came from the 1800s, I would think you were a witch.
Yeah. On that subject, maybe I'm on topic here. Maybe I'm changing the subject a little bit here, but on your Twitter handle, I believe in your title, you have dates in time.
No, those are actually blocks. Those are blocks that I purchased in StackChain.
Okay. Do they have any significant representation? Because I noticed 1971, then you have 2008.
These are blocks that I purchased. These are coveted years that are associated, blocks that are associated with years. So StackChain is basically the gamification of purchasing Bitcoin. It's a bunch of Bitcoin maxi maniacs who are purchasing Bitcoin in the doldrums of the bear market. They don't care about price. And we're just having fun, and we're encouraging each other to continue to purchase Bitcoin. And it turns out that StackChain is it's a human experiment it's an experiment in human consensus that mimics the programmatic consensus of the Bitcoin protocol. And so It's just a fun game. So all of those things that are in there are actually blocks that I have purchased. 1971 is a very important block. 2008 is a very important block. That's the Genesis block. 1923 was a block that was important to me because it was the Beer Hall Putsch in Germany, and it's the reason that I'm alive today, because Hermann Goering was shot, and I'm Jewish. Hermann Goering was shot, and my great uncle let him in the door, patched him up, and told the police he hadn't come that way. Well, come 1939, my grandfather and my mother and my grandfather's entire family, which was rather small, gets out of Nazi Germany to the United States, to England and the United States between 1939 and 1942, because Hermann Goering repays the favor to the family. So that was an important year for me. And then 1964 is the year that I was born, et cetera, et cetera.
1965 you have. Oh, excuse me, you have 1665. What's that date?
Oh,
Yeah, you got to say what's 1225 and what's 1665.
1225 is the Christmas block.
Okay.
So it's 1225. There's only one of
Yeah,
them. It's the
December
Christmas
25th.
block.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep. And then 1665 is this is something it was the War of 1666 was started because of Block 1665, and this was a 7-day fork war. So Stack Chain is literally a continuous thread on Twitter of replies. It is currently 2,582 replies long. It's the longest continuous thread in Twitter history. And there's lots of side chains. So just like with Bitcoin, there's a main chain, and then there's a bunch of side chains which are not at the same height as the main chain. And in 1665, I bought 1665, and I posted that was the girl with the pearl earring because Vermeer painted the girl with the pearl earring in 1665, and I put that picture into the tweet. And I then bought 1666, and somebody else bought 1666 at the same time. And so now you have two competing chains that are building to see who can be the longest, just like with Bitcoin, and the longest chain wins. And that was a 50 block war. So there was 50, I purchased, basically me and a couple other people purchased 50 continuous blocks. And it went over a period of 7 days, and it has personal meaning to me because of that.
Gotcha. Just in case the audience is completely confused, I don't blame you. I've been confused on Stack Chain for a long time. But basically, it means nothing. It's just fun. It's something to do to help bring Bitcoiners together and to keep a conversation alive and to have fun stacking sats
Exactly.
or Satoshis, as it's known.
Exactly.
So the last one you have is 2222. Is that just because of the lucky number representation of the same number, or?
Yeah, it's because 2222 there will only be one 2222. And
Okay.
so yeah, that was yeah. And it was also because I actually so Corey Clipston from Swan, who's the CEO of Swan, he is also in Stack Chain, and he said that he was going to buy every 21 because the 21s represent the 21 million Bitcoin that'll only ever be produced. And he threw down the gauntlet, saying that I'm going to purchase every 21 from at the time, which was 18, I believe it was 1800 at the time, to 10 block 10,000. And so anytime a 21 comes up, there's some contentiousness around it because we as stack chainers don't feel that a whale, some guy with proof of stake power, hash power, should be able to get what he wants. So we have a tendency to have fights around the 21s because of that.
So
I can see you're smiling, and this is what it's all about. It's just kind of stupid. It's really kind of ridiculous fun that we have about really stupid things. It's a bunch of idiots having fun buying Bitcoin.
So I have to imagine in those situations, it's a pool of you guys all stacking at the same time and trying to add up to whatever that value that needs to be purchased at that 21 block.
Yes, or just purchasing it outright. 2121, having $2,121, $2,121 to be able to purchase that particular block.
Awesome. I'm glad that the story is that and not something else, because I think that's a much more memorable story for your name. And I only assume now, having heard your family story, that the German flag in there is kind of a representation of that situation.
I have German citizenship.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. And the reason I have German citizenship is because of Basic Law 116, which states that anybody who can show that their parents or grandparents were forced out of Germany by the National Socialists can apply for and have their citizenship reinstated. It's as if I was born there.
Okay.
And so one of my ideas is to become a sovereign individual. And to become a sovereign, you cannot be a sovereign individual in this world with a US citizenship, because the US government will follow you wherever you go. Whereas German citizenship, as long as I'm not living in Germany, they will not tax me, for instance. They say, if you're going to live somewhere else, you follow the rules of that country. So it enables your ability to become a sovereign individual to a much greater degree than the United States citizenship does.
Huh. Maybe then my next chance will be I'll have to move to El Salvador and give them 2 Bitcoin, and then I'll get El Salvadorian citizenship.
Yeah, that's that. Or if you're Irish, you can get Irish citizenship. If you're Spanish, you can. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can, if you can show the lineage of your family history, that you can acquire citizenship from other countries.
Yeah, my wife, she's actually German, born and raised there. She just became a U.S. citizen last year. Much more of a political sort of stand, I think, just because of all of the craziness that's happening in Germany and how they're really becoming much more of a closed society again, which is kind of scary on the surface of it. You know, one of the things, hearing your story about how your family was able to flee, be saved by a German and then flee the country to safety. I think about that a lot with the idea and the philosophy behind Bitcoin and it being a world currency, is because it's digital and because you can carry your passwords basically in your head and take them anywhere in the world. You know, you mentioned silver is very heavy to carry around, and gold is this pretty much the same, because both coins are denominated in 1 ounce weights. That when Jewish people were fleeing Germany or countries that were being oppressed by Germany before World War II, they really could only get out with what they had on their backs and whatever they could carry in their pockets, which didn't happen to be very much. And in a lot of cases, it was only enough to secure passage on a boat somewhere. And then when they got to wherever they were going, they just kind of had to figure it out. And with Bitcoin, it's the first time in human history where a person who is being treated poorly in their country or threatened of death or violence can leave that jurisdiction with all of their wealth intact. And to me, it's one of the most powerful things and one of the most freedom experiencing things a human could have, is the ability to move freely around the world with your knowledge and your experiences and your wealth intact, and go someplace else and start new.
Absolutely. And if we look at the diaspora that left Syria, for example, 3 million refugees on the road in when was it, 2016? 3 million refugees on the road. A lot of them ended up in Europe and in Germany. Think of the amount of wealth that they would have been able to leave with. And these people were, you know, and or the people leaving Afghanistan when the United States left Afghanistan 2 years ago. Lots of people there. Or look at Ukraine. How many people left Ukraine and couldn't take their wealth? You know, you can't take your house with you.
Yeah.
You can't, you know, and people don't realize gold is really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly, and somebody can steal it from you very easily. I mean, you know, if you have I personally would not suggest that people carry their seed phrase in their head, but if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. I think having it, or if it is in your head, you want to have it in your head for as short a time as possible. And then write it down and make sure that it is indeed, because, you know, if you get bonked on the head, you may forget it, and it's kind of lost forever at that point.
I say walk around with a helmet and tell people you're a narcoleptic. You know,
right,
so you can get to where you're going.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. And so,
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It is the first time in history that the transportability, the unconfiscatability, its censorship resistance, its decentralized nature, all of these properties are incredibly valuable. And so when you're orange pilling them and somebody says, well, it's got no value, well, hold on, it has a lot of value. I mean, Would you value something that you could carry across a border? Could you carry the value of your house across the border? No, but you can
Mhm.
carry the value of your house in Bitcoin across the border and nobody can stop you.
Yeah, for sure. Bitcoin, we try to explain it simplistically to people as possible to give them a point of relevance. And so
Hey
early
Chris, I'm
on,
gonna I'm gonna turn on the light real quick.
yeah, no
I hope you
problem.
don't mind. I'm getting awfully dark in here.
I've heard Bitcoin referred to as a digital gold, or digital property, or a digital commodity, or a digital currency. Um, you know, One of the great things about Bitcoin is it can be different things to different people. There's no right answer for what it is, but what we do know that it has is value. And it's a great way to move value around the world, in a very frictionless system. And by frictionless, I mean uh, cost. When we're sending dollars or local currencies or gold or silver around the world, there's a lot of hands that touch that, and every time a hand touches it, there's a fee associated with it. But with Bitcoin, none of those fees exist. And so Peter and I could basically send money back and forth to one another, and we could have US dollars, we could transfer that into Bitcoin, I could send it to him in Bitcoin, and then he could transfer it back out into dollars in really less than 1 minute, which negates most of the price volatility involved in that transaction and have final settlement. So he could basically, again, take that cash and cash it right out and use it to pay his bills or buy a house or do whatever he wants with it, as long as he's following whatever the jurisdictional rules are and taxation of that money, just like a physical currency. But if we were to
You
make the
know,
same, go
go
ahead.
go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I would
Oh, no,
say,
I
but
thought
if
you were
we were
done.
going
Go
to
ahead.
make the same transaction with dollars, we'd have to go down to our bank. We'd have to fill out a form. Let's say it's $10,001 of value in Bitcoin. Bitcoin to Bitcoin, we could make that transaction just like I said. If it was $10,001 with dollars, I'd have to go down to the bank. I'd have to tell the bank that I want to send money over to Peter. They'd make me fill out a long form because it's over $10,000. Then there would be a hold on my account for that value. Then ultimately it would be sent over to him within probably 3 days. But then there would be a hold on his side of the account for up to 7 to 10 days, while the physical money actually transferred from one bank over to the other. And then when he wanted to cash that $10,000 out, he'd have to tell the bank why he needs that money also. So you have people involved in this transaction that could have been, I'm buying a cow or something like that. Like, there's no reason for a third party intermediary to be involved in this transaction. We're not doing anything wrong. We're not doing anything illegal. We're not money laundering. We're just two people who are trying to buy goods and services from one another and send value. But in today's world, it seems like it's guilty until proven innocent instead of innocent until proven guilty, even on the financial side. So, Bitcoin is kind of considered the people's money, because for the first time in human history, we as people have the right to have final settlement and ownership of an asset that no government can tell us we can't have. Now, they can keep us from buying it. They can keep us from exchanging it into physical currency. But as long as we agree that there's value in it in the form of Bitcoin, we really don't have to do that either. So these are just a couple of the amazing things that Bitcoin can do, and can be considered. Because a common question we get asked, and I'm sure a lot of people out there who are looking at getting into Bitcoin ask, is, what is Bitcoin? And when you're presented with that question, Peter, I know you wanted to say something else, but after you say whatever you're going to say, how do you explain to people what Bitcoin is?
Bitcoin is a base layer technology that is secure and allows us to transact between individuals. And if someone says to me that, well, what kind of value does it have? I say it has whatever value we ascribe to it. Currently, the value in U.S. denominated terms is around $16,500. And if you don't think that that's any value, well, then you can go ahead and send me a Bitcoin. It'd be fine with me. I don't mind. But when they ask what it is, that's a really hard question to answer because you can go so many directions. It is an ethos. I mean, basically, it's money. That's what it is. It's money. It's value. It's energy. It is. It is unlike anything that we have known to date. So if we were to say, what is the US dollar? People would say, well, it's money. But really what the US dollar is, it is the monopoly on violence that the US government has because it enforces its dollar through the Seventh Fleet and the armies that it can wield and the power that it can wield around the world. Bitcoin is very different because, as you said, Bitcoin is people's money, and Bitcoin is a decentralized network. It's a technology, it's a protocol that allows for the transfer of value from peer to peer in a secure ledger. It's basically what it is. It's just a ledger, and it just says this amount of value is ascribed to this particular private key, and only this private key can move this value to some other private key. And that's basically, I think at its base, that's what it is. It's just a ledger.
Okay. So, and if someone would say to you,
I'm sorry, Chris, it's an incorruptible ledger.
Incorruptible ledger. I like that. I like that. Yeah. So if someone were to say to you, okay, I get that it has value, but it'll never be used for daily transactions because it takes too long to settle. 10 minutes is too long. How would you respond to that?
This plays into what I wanted to say in regards to what you were talking about transferring money in the traditional banking system. What people don't realize is that they pay a cost for that. The cost for that is hidden. Even though when I make a wire transfer, it's $15, but the actual cost of that wire transfer is far higher than that, and I pay that in hidden fees. For instance, in the amount of money that it costs me in interest to borrow money, that's a fee that I'm paying for this banking system that we have created, and that's paying for the friction of that banking system. So when you ask the question, I'm sorry, now I've forgotten. I forgot. Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Yeah, the question is okay, I get that Bitcoin has value, but it'll never be used in daily transactions because
it's too slow. Okay, so when you move money across the world via you want to talk about slow, well, Bitcoin, you're right, it's slow. It takes 10 minutes for a transaction to be cemented into the blockchain. When you move money across the world via the SWIFT system, it can take up to 2 weeks for that final settlement to occur. I would say personally that 10 minutes for final settlement, or approximately thereof, maybe less than an hour, is far faster than up to 2 weeks for final settlement via the traditional finance system. There's also, that's why we don't move money on layer one with our traditional finance system. That's layer one. That's something that we rarely utilize because of the cost and the amount of time that it takes. We use layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and layer 5. The debit card system is layer 4 or layer 5. The credit card system that we utilize is layer 5. With Bitcoin, because it is such a young technology, we now have a layer 2 system that's called Lightning. Lightning is almost instantaneous in its ability. It is quicker, or as quick as your debit or credit card transaction, only that's just the surface. So on the surface, when you go to withdraw money with your debit card or pay for something with your debit card, it seems like it happens right away. But all that is the credit card company, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, making a promise to the bank or to the vendor, making a promise to the vendor that that money will, that value will be eventually deposited into the vendor's account. Then behind the scenes, they go to the bank. There's all this machination. It can take 2 or 3 days or a couple of weeks, once again, for that value to actually be final settlement in the vendor's account. With Lightning, not only is it just like a debit card where it takes a couple of seconds for you to make the transaction, but the settlement is final and it is right then. The finality happens at the end of the transaction period, which is a couple to 10 seconds or so, something like that. So I would say that it is incredibly quick to be able to use the layer 2 that is on top of that's being built on top of Bitcoin currently.
Yeah, there's a gentleman by the name of Will Reeves, who's the founder of Fold Card, which is a Bitcoin debit card where you can get Bitcoin rewards for every transaction that you make on the debit card. And when he first started that business 2 years ago, he partnered with Visa so that it could be used on the Visa network for all debit card transactions, whether you're going to Costco or filling up your tank of gas or the grocery store or whatever. And the transactions were picking up, and the adoption of his debit card were increasing so quickly that Visa got on the phone with him and said, "What is going on? What are you offering here? How are you able to increase the money flow through our system so quickly? We've never seen numbers like this." They literally told him, "We've never seen numbers like this." And so basically what the Fold Card is every time you make a transaction with your credit card, we as consumers, we don't know this unless we are a retail vendor that accepts a credit card. But there are transaction fees. You can pay anywhere from 1% to 5% transaction fee plus 10 cents or 25 cents per transaction that the retail vendor has to pay for every
and there's a
transaction.
There's a minimum transaction too.
And there's a minimum transaction too. So
which is why Visa and MasterCard are not in the emerging markets, because the transaction threshold is so small, it's micro in those markets, so they don't even bother to go there.
So what happens with those transaction fees is there's a split between the generator of the particular business or credit card. In this case, it would be Fold. A lot of people have like an Amazon card or an airline card of some sort, or whatever kind of credit card you have, or a banking credit card. There's always a company behind that credit card. And they're basically a referral for Visa or MasterCard. So Visa or MasterCard pays them a referral fee for every transaction that comes through that network. So a portion of that percentage fee that the retail investor is paying gets paid back to the bank, the airline, the Costco, the Amazon, the Kohl's, the Target, the whatever. And so what this particular company, Fold App, is doing is they're taking their cut of that transaction fee and they're splitting it with their customers. Other credit card companies would say, we'll give you air miles, we'll give you cash back, we'll give you, whatever. And in this case, this particular company gives you Bitcoin for every transaction that you use. So when Bitcoin first came out, when the adoption was trying to pick up, a lot of people who were getting these Bitcoins through their the quote unquote mining of the blockchain early on were given 50 Bitcoin every time that they mined a block. And because there were so few people who were building this network, they got a lot of Bitcoin really quick. And so they would just give it away for free because at the time it had no value. And up until about 2014, you could still find ways to get free Bitcoin. But then once Bitcoin got a value, and then when it went to $100, and then it went to $300, then it went to $1,000, all of a sudden people were like, "Oh, that 100 Bitcoin I gave you is now worth $100,000. Like, I'm not going to give any more Bitcoin away because this thing is picking up legs and it could really be worth something." So Now in the Bitcoin community, we're still working on adoption. And it's so great that there are these companies out there like Will Reeves and Fold. And again, I use the Fold card. I'm not a sponsor of Fold. They don't pay me anything. I just get Bitcoin every time I use their service, and I really enjoy their service and how easy it is to use. But they take a cut of that and they pay it back in Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin becomes what we as Bitcoiners believe the true value of Bitcoin is, and right now we look at it, we look at the next leg in Bitcoin as, you know, what asset class could this most realistically be like, and we look at it as gold. So gold has a market cap of about $10 trillion, of which about $5 trillion of it is liquid and tradable. And so if the Bitcoin price reaches $10 trillion, then the Bitcoin price would be, I don't know, a couple $100,000 or something like that. So these little minute Satoshis that we're getting right now, that it takes about 5,400 Satoshis to equal $1 US. As the price of Bitcoin goes up, these Satoshis are going to be more and more valuable, which means that this accumulation that we're getting at this really low rate ultimately could equal a retirement fund per se, you know. So there are other companies out there that are doing this. There's another one, Lolly, and there are a few. But if you're interested in getting into Bitcoin and you're not quite sure where to start, and you don't want to put your own money into it, but you are spending money on a daily basis, fold.app is the website you can go to and sign up for a card there. And you basically link it to your checking account or savings account, and you use it just like you would your bank debit card, and the rest of it takes care of itself. So check that out. But I just wanted to say that, you know, there are ways now that Bitcoin is growing, and it's not just a money, like Peter was saying, it's a base layer technology that businesses can build upon and create additional value in it in a way that very few other assets or commodities have the ability to do. Sorry for rambling there. I did want this show to be about you, but are you familiar with the Fold card? Do you use it, or?
I am familiar with the Fold card, and to be honest with you, I don't use it. And the reason I don't use it is it's very, when I went to the Fold site, I don't think Fold is attractive to a certain segment or demographic. It's not my demographic. It's that the colors are very, very bright. There's a lot going on. And it's kind of carnival-like in its atmosphere. And I'm personally, I feel like I'm a little more serious than that. And I find it distracting. When I personally like the way Apple designs things. It's very clean. It's very intuitive for me, and it's very direct. Okay, this is what I'm doing. It presents me one thing at a time. And when I have gone to the Fold site, and I've actually given this feedback to Fold. When I go to the Fold site, I am literally overwhelmed, and I think that there's probably a lot of boomers that would feel that. I know there's a lot of boomers that feel the same way that I do with the Fold site in particular. But that doesn't mean that there's not a demographic that is really attractive to. It's just not me and my demographic.
No, I can understand that, because they have kind of done a gamification of, you know, spending money. Every transaction you do, you either get 1% back in Bitcoin, or you can spin the wheel, you know, and risk it all, or whatever, and make up to one coin, or it's kind of like Wheel of Fortune.
And that's not to dump on Fold. Once again, I really think that there's definitely I know people who love it, and they use it every day for everything they can. It's just, like I said, it just doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. I know we've been talking for about an hour and a half now, and so I want to be conscientious of your time. But I did want to ask you for your demographic and the people that you talk to, you know, are there any products out there in the Bitcoin community that need to be built that you think would help onboard more of the older generation into the space? Or what do you
Well,
think is lacking?
I think that we have to understand that, once again, I'm going to go back to, when you have a need or a necessity for one or many of the properties of Bitcoin, you will buy Bitcoin at whatever price it is at that time. I would tell people that who have no interest in Bitcoin, I would say you might want to take 1 to 5% of your portfolio and just invest it blindly in Bitcoin, just as insurance, just as a way to diversify in a traditional finance kind of way. If it takes off and becomes something that we can't predict, much like the internet did, well, hey, then you're going to be able to participate in that. And
Can you
if it
expand a little bit
doesn't,
more on that insurance piece of the puzzle that you talked about?
yeah, that's a Greg Foss and Lawrence Lepard kind of thesis, that it's insurance against the debasement of fiat currency. We know that fiat currency is designed to debase at 2% per year into infinity. The US dollar has lost 99% of its value in the last 100 years, so clearly that's working. Bitcoin is an asset that has a scarcity. There's only ever going to be 21 million or 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. And because it is capped and probably the scarcest thing known to humanity, I mean, if you think about the universe and how much gold there is in the universe, how many diamonds there are in the universe, as far as a bearer asset, there's probably nothing as scarce. And so as the fiat currencies debase, this particular bearer asset should be able to maintain its value in against that when denominated in that currency. So as the US dollar debases, then your Bitcoin should, like gold, your Bitcoin should retain its value. The difference between Bitcoin and one of the differences between Bitcoin and gold is that gold can be produced at a higher rate when it is more expensive, or when it is worth more, it's produced at a higher rate. And Bitcoin, it has a steady one block every 10 minutes, which means that there is a block reward every 10 minutes. That is how much is produced, and it is programmatic. And then also with gold, for example, we don't know how much gold there is. I mean, it is a meteorite from planet X going to land on Earth that is multi-million tons of gold? Well, no, probably not. But is there something floating around in space that has a huge proportion of gold in it that somebody could discover? Yes. That's a possibility. With Bitcoin, that's not a possibility because it's programmatic. So it becomes, as Greg Foss likes to say, you don't buy fire insurance for your house after it's already burned. You buy the fire insurance for your house before it burns, to protect yourself and your investment in case it burns. We know that the fiat currency in the world is burning. You should probably just buy a little bit of insurance. You know what? If in your lifetime or your kid's lifetime you don't use it, hey, that's okay. It's just a small percentage of your portfolio, at 1% or 5%, between 1 and 5% of your portfolio. If it turns out that it was a mistake to do, it's not going to kill you. But if it turns out that these very smart people in the space are correct, and it turns into what many of us think it is going to become, which is significantly higher value than it is now, then you get to participate in that increase. So that's what I mean by insurance.
Fantastic. But Peter, I think that's if you don't mind, I think that's a great place to kind of end this first conversation that we've had. I hope maybe in the future that I can have you back on the show again, and we can talk a little bit more and dive into some of the other topics that we touched on. Kind of as a last handoff to you here, if people are interested to learn more about your thought process on Bitcoin or to follow you, how would they get in touch with you and ask some questions?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Peter Ansell 9. But I would suggest you just come into Cafe Bitcoin or any of the spaces that go on Twitter at any time, and just start to listen. Or like you said, it depends on how you learn. Some people like to learn by reading, some people like to learn by watching, some people like to learn by listening. I'm a listener. So the Twitter Spaces has been really wonderful for me. I would suggest you figure out what the best way is for you to learn, and then reach out to some real smart individuals who actually have original thoughts. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those. I'm just a guy that has been learning. I'm just a pleb. The guy that's been learning as I've been going, and I hope the things that I have said today have been accurate. I am sure there are some people, once again, who are smarter than me, who would say, hey, you didn't say that quite right, and that's okay, because I would actually appreciate that, for somebody to critique the things that I say, because then I can learn what the correct way to say it is. But I would say just come on to Cafe Bitcoin in the morning. It's on 5 days a week, from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific, and you can really learn a lot just by sitting in there and listening. And I occasionally speak, but there are some really smart people in that space, and it is friendly, and it is for beginners and experts alike. So that would be my suggestion.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Nobody in Bitcoin has all the answers. Even the smartest people in the room in Bitcoin don't have all the answers, like you alluded to earlier in the conversation. It is a newer asset. It's only got 14 years of track record so far here. So we're all kind of learning together. It's a great place to get to know one another and to ask questions. And as the technology improves and more things get built upon Bitcoin, the conversations that we're having today will change year over year, which they always do. But definitely start learning. Don't take Peter or myself. Don't take anything that we've said as gospel. We're just two guys who are interested in Bitcoin and interested in learning as much as we can about it. And everybody should go out and do their own research and take advantage of the technology and everything that it can provide for your family or not. You do your own assessment on risk and how much you're willing to allocate to this particular asset class. We're not financial advisors, and this is not financial advice. This is just two guys who are having a conversation and enjoying learning from one another and everything that Bitcoin brings to us. And again, this is Chris Bobe with Wisdom Through Bitcoin podcast, where we interview people who are a little bit later in life, who are looking at their retirement and realizing that they might need to make some changes away from the traditional system to ensure that they're able to live the rest of their days in the best possible way. So reach out to us at Wisdom Through Bitcoin podcast on Twitter, or CS Bobe, which is at CS Bobe on Twitter, or find us on YouTube and listen to all our videos. Hope you enjoyed this conversation, and see you next time.